Greetings. My name is Jace Hargis, and I'm fortunate to be a member of the New Zealand Food and Fibre Center for Vocational Excellence, part of their Emerging Technologies Project Steering Group. As part of this, I was asked to give some ideas and information, some background on affordances and constraints of integrating emerging technology, such as generative artificial intelligence, into teaching and learning in higher education. I would like to go ahead and share just a very brief background, super brief here. I do have some background in curriculum and instruction, science education. Did some work in environmental engineering sciences. I began my career as a chemist and a project manager for an engineering firm, and then I have some background in, started off in oceanography. I've been fortunate to work in various capacities in higher education, so professor, VP, AVP, director in various states in the United States, and internationally in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and China. I've been fortunate to publish quite widely on emerging technologies, integration into higher education, teaching, and learning, and have about over 150 articles that I certainly am happy to share any of those. I guess I'm the most proud of these days is I've had an ongoing sharing event. So every week I share what I call kind of just-in-time research on how faculty could use and integrate technology appropriately, relevantly in their teaching and learning through my Substack blog. I'll post this Google slide presentation on the YouTube channel that I'll have shared. And so if you want to click on any of these links, you certainly can access these articles and this information quickly. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to try, there's the agenda, a few abbreviations. I'll be using these quite frequently, like generative artificial intelligence, this GenAI, higher ed, a kind of a focus on the vocational educational and training, or VET, as you know it. But this is all going to focus in on teaching and learning, and I'll operationalize some of these terms very soon. I'll do a really quick background on the previous research paper that we did for the food and fiber research. I'll share a very brief background on AI and general AI, and kind of tell the difference of those for those folks that may not have been following this as closely. I'll share a bit of the international research, mostly that I've done in this capacity, and then kind of hit on some affordances and constraints and mitigation of what Gen AI can possibly do for our teaching and learning. I will touch upon just some possible next steps with a kind of advanced organizer warning that things are moving extremely quick. So chances are by the time you view this, much of this information might be kind of old. A little side note on kind of the next steps is I'll try to kind of think about taking it from the GoFi, which is the good old-fashioned artificial intelligence for those who are following these things that it started many years ago, to the current kind of AI in 2025. So I'm sure you can access this paper if you'd like to read, but here's a really brief summary, and I'll give kind of one global comment on this, is that a year and a half ago, 2023, when we kind of wrote this, a lot of these were ideas that were just coming up. They were proposals. Maybe they were kind of research questions that a lot of people around the world were trying to do. So I think the biggest difference between 2023 and now is that we now have some research that have shown some of these approaches to integrating AI in particular into teaching and learning have shown some promise. And so we have a little bit of data. Of course, how much data can you have in a year and a half? But in this particular paper, we discussed potential AI uses in assessment, measurement, and evaluation with digital assistance, some intelligent tutoring, which means kind of this conversation, this dialogue, and then managing the overall learning to turn that into some personalized learning. As far as the learning aspect, the reading, writing, research, a lot of voice to text in languages for students and learners with disabilities. Think about report writing drafts, which of course you would have to unpack, and even some project management software. Teaching, helping develop some inclusive lesson plans, possibly using Wiggins-McTighe backward design of the learning outcomes, the measurements, and then the teaching experiences. Looking at embedding it, but also kind of supplementing it to our research, helping build, check curriculum, scaffolding learning with conceptual frameworks, kind of highlighting some active engagement, active learning techniques, the ones that we already know, and possibly updating those with some AI bots or some agents, and really looking at these alternative authentic assessments. Again, I'll share a few of this information later the things that have been done, and a lot has been doing in this very aggressively. The benefits, thinking about how this might benefit our students, is providing some sort of adaptive designs that can kind of see where they're going, see where they're coming from, maybe anticipate some of their problem areas and provide resources for them. Idea generations, scenarios, case studies, teaching strategies, all these were some really innovative ideas, and thinking about how we can use this in a productive way. And that'll be kind of a common theme when we talk about how AI and Gen AI can be used in a very positive, productive way. Obviously, there were challenges at the time that we were thinking about. Is it over-reliance? Looking at the ethical concerns, the privacy issues, the intellectual properties. There were certainly a lot more hallucinations, and we'll talk a bit about that, how they've kind of minimized some of those. But then identifying really which of these are going to be best for us, and even which Gen AIs and which platforms may be most useful. I couldn't help but, as I was creating this presentation, I kept on thinking that I was just kind of talking, and I'm not sure of the group that's going to be viewing this now and later, but I've been in kind of this business for well, it's almost 25 years. And my dissertation was really focusing on how higher education people learn via the internet. It was a fairly new thing back in the mid-90s. I kind of observed constructivist and objectivist format, linear, nonlinear, and things have really taken a different approach. But even then, we really had this concept, and you may have even heard of this term Luddite. So I just want to remind folks a few things that people who kind of are commonly thought of these people who oppose or try to avoid technology in general, let alone technology within the academics. That's a common term, but when you scratch the surface, you realize that the original Luddites in the early 1800s, they actually knew quite a bit about technology at the time. And what happened, obviously, was that they were tech savvy, but they realized that the owners of the factories in the UK actually were using technology for really one reason. That was just to increase efficiency. And they saw that hyper focus on efficiency reduced the quality. And so it ended up with some low quality. I couldn't help but think about whether it's PowerPoint or it's Twitter or it's, you name your technology that you may or may not have seen integrated in higher ed. Keeping this lens, this kind of perspective of it's not about the tech. And we say, tech is tool. We have all these little jargon things that we say. But the bottom line is I kind of think about, keeping on that lens, that perspective of the original Luddites and using tech, but realizing and making sure that if we are going to use it, that it doesn't lower that quality experience for our students. There's always been a bit about ed tech or pedagogy, andragogy, and what does tech have to do with those? And are they combined? Are they integrated? Are they separate? How that goes? And I think there's still this ongoing uncertainty about the perfect sweet spot that those two can kind of live in the same universe. And so my ultimate question here, as I kind of think about a problem statement and a research question, is this a milestone? Can AI possibly open up another venture, another viewpoint at renewing a view on quality? Again, I'll do this briefly because I have a sense that most people have been following this, whether they like to or not. We've really been inundated with this information. But I want to make sure that people understand the differences here, and I'll try to use these terms very clearly. So AI is this global terminology, and it really is focusing on this idea to using data to improve efficiency. And you're probably familiar with digital assistants, Siri and Alexa, and the self-driving navigation. You're seeing some self-driving cars and GPS, facial recognitions. These are kind of using AI. But there's a sub part of that, which is generative AI, which basically is using some sort of a text, image. It's this really broad now, image and music and sounds and coding. And it's basically detecting these patterns. And all it's doing is it's looking at those patterns. And of course, the more patterns it has, the more data it has. That's why they call these large language models. The better it is to simply predict the next word, the next couple of words. And so there's nothing magical about these. And I want to kind of always remind people that I work with, and I work with a lot of faculty around the world, is that my very thin sliver of research is on how generative AI could impact or could be integrated inside of teaching and learning for higher education. So that's a niche of a niche of a niche. I do like to share a few of the popular ones out there, because some people will say, AI is the same as GPT or Chat GPT. And so I kind of spell out what GPT means, right? People sometimes forget these things. But there's other platforms. There have been, and there are others being developed. Claude and Gemini and Perplexity and Pi and Grok, and most recently DeepSeek. You're seeing a lot of these come up, and I use them all as I best see them fit. Sometimes one's better than another for doing case studies. analyzing data, doing qualitative analysis. And so it isn't a one size fits all here. I do recommend that people look at these as very different tools. If you're ever interested in seeing which one of these is the best in a certain matrix, Berkeley University has come out with a chatbot arena leaderboard that you can click on and see. I think currently in February, Gemini is actually leading, again, for what that's worth. There are some types. You hear a lot of this hype and everyone wants to jump to the science fiction Terminator type, but really we need to remember that today, and again, could be different tomorrow, of these three types, we're still very early on, even though artificial intelligence kind of came up, decades ago as an idea. That's the good old fashioned, is looking at it with kind of these algorithms and a step-by-step process of how you could possibly train a computer by having them do step-by-steps. Now we're doing more with reinforcement learning and kind of inferences, but we're still at the fairly narrow stages of what's called narrow. So when again, my subgenre is going to be this Gen AI. It's a very narrow form. It's only going to be able to do what we kind of inform it to do and kind of coach it to do. And so that's the arena that I want to make sure that people know that I know that where I am and a lot of my colleagues with the research, we're not into the other two, which is the large area of generalized. You're hearing some things in the news about AGI, and we may be close a year, 2 years, 4 years. I'm not here to predict any of those. I'm not a computer engineer, computer scientist. I'm trying to work with what we do have and see how we may be able to work that into a very functional way with teaching and learning. But I just wanted to clarify that that's kind of where we are with these. I'll share some of my research, this international research. I've been fortunate to work in the UAE and in Qatar and in China. And so I still have a lot of colleagues that are working on some of these. About a year ago, I created, after all this conversation that was going on with some colleagues of mine, we were trying to see how we could actually use these very much integrated using ChatGPT and GitHub and Copilot and trying to help a colleague of mine and his graduate TAs at using this and trying to create a very interactive, engaging environment for coding or creative coding. And so using a bit of the creativity, using a bit of the actual coding techniques, it was a kind of a unique system. And we found out that it worked out very well. It came out with all kinds of interesting outcomes that we hadn't anticipated. But the problems weren't what we thought they would be, right? We thought there would be some of the common things anytime you integrate technology. But I think that this particular group, of course, this is a microcosm, folks that were very comfortable with technology, use it in a productive way. I was really thrilled about the same time frame a year ago, after all the talk when the first GPT came out in November 22, as I thought, can this really, support and help teaching? And so I offer a course design studio using Wiggins and McTighe backward design. It's an intensive 20-hour, kind of a 3-day event. And I walk faculty through creating good measurable learning outcomes, aligning those to good authentic assessments with analytical rubrics that have inter-rater reliabilities. And then we offer it and kind of align our active learning techniques with that as well. And so I basically went and I used GPT at the time to create an entire course, an environmental science course that I typically teach, and ask it to generate learning outcomes and ask it to do the assessments. The one thing I want to make sure people are really clear is that I do, and I strongly encourage, and so it's not going to do anything more than you can do. So you need content experts very well aligned with this, double checking everything that is putting out. But I have to say, I was surprised, and the faculty I've worked with, which is a good many over the past year, have been using various forms of Gen AI and creating portions of their syllabus and their courses and their outcomes and their assessments. And I think that, again, on the right situations, it can really be helpful. Harvard graduate schools come out with a better feedback. And so you're seeing a lot of this conversations going on with personalized assistance and more formative feedback and resources, not just multiple choice, yes or no, but more qualitative. The student can actually create short answers, can submit various papers and get some really clear feedback in a just-in-time kind of a way. And it isn't just telling right or wrong, it actually providing examples, providing resources, all these kind of things that we'd love to be able to do for every student. We can't quite do it as we have a larger workload, more classes and so forth. This particular website actually also does this, has a conversation about summarizing student reflections. I do a lot of metacognitive activities in my classrooms. I'm sure that you might as well. But taking all those reflections and really turning those into productive, longitudinal kind of conversations that the student can have with themselves, which builds more of that self-regulated learning that we always hope that they're doing. And I just posted, I wanted to post the final one there that I did with some colleagues in Qatar that I did, seems like years ago, but we actually looked at a lot of the things that faculty were using. This was kind of a unique one and early on because there was a lot of hallucinations in the first GPTs. This was only about 6 months after the first one came out. But what we did was we took a very closed data set of all that qualitative data that how students and faculty were using it at the time. And we did an analysis for clusters and recognizing patterns and so forth. And we did a 20% quality control by hand to kind of check. And we were really very, very pleased to see how powerful and how quickly the GPT at that time did these analyses that would have taken much longer by hand, even with using something like historical max QDAs or in vivo type qualitative softwares. Examples, hopefully you've seen some of these, but using Salem States, using some options for syllabi. I'm not going to say that you should or you shouldn't, but we should always do as we kind of good foundational practices is that we should be very transparent, very clear with our students. What is plagiarism? How are you going to measure success? What kind of tools and learning materials do they need? And if you are going to use AI, if you're not going to use AI, be very clear about what that might mean. So they've got some different options you can kind of copy and paste and update and use. Writing is with academic integrity and thinking about plagiarism. There's a lot of conversations about that. And so instead of banning it or policing it, they're trying to think about how you can actually use AI as a resource. North Carolina State has some things about the ethical use of Gen AI tools. So there's not a shortage of suggestions. There's no answers. There's no absolutes, but there's a lot of examples and resources out there. And then, as I mentioned, there's even some great stuff about just sample language for coursework. And so if you're going to use these, how are you going to use these? Are you going to use it outside class, inside class? Are you going to do something outside class, bring it in and unpack it? I do a lot of this when I teach. I encourage them to go out and I do a lot of project-based learning and I have them basically use AI and then bring it in and we'll look for the problems and the gaps and the hallucinations. And through that searching, there's a lot of learning that takes place. Some of the affordances, I'm kind of going to be repeating myself a bit here, but lots and lots on assessment and feedback. 2022 from Huda, just looking at how this might work in a very kind of a clear, easy way, not in isolation. I mean, this is really the key here is that it's going to be a supplement, a resource. There's got to be a check and balance. I mentioned earlier about self-regulated learning, some of my early work that I've done, and I think that this AI could be a real asset, a real good partner for students. This particular paper just published last year, I came out with these 6 Ps. And so planning, prompting, preview, produce, peer review, and kind of an e-portfolio, walking the faculty and the students through using AI for these uses. There are 2 fairly new ones, 24, came out last year about one's called Titan. I kind of think this is quite an interesting way to look at it. More and more as you're seeing about reinforcement learning. DeepSeek had done this most recently about a month ago, looking at really mimicking what goes on with AI with the human brain. So they're using these long-term memory modules. Historically, you could only do one or the other. You could kind of have it reach back or you kind of have it work in the now. And there's some research out there now that basically the Titan can do both. It can kind of hold a historical context in place and can kind of bring in the real-time learning and combine those two, which can be powerful. We'll see where that takes us in some of the next steps. And the last one there, this explainable tool, which we've always wanted students, especially when they're doing mathematical or science, to explain how they came to these answers. Well, this is a new kind of an AI tool that promotes that, provides a space for students to provide explanations and then some feedback on those explanations so that the students are becoming more aware of their progress. As a global statement, what I really like is that the possibility of using AI and really reinforcing some of those foundational learning theories that we wanted students to be able to do. Self-efficacy, self-regulation, metacognition. These are key in really deep learning. So the next to the last kind of section here, I do want to share, obviously, there's going to be some issues, problems, challenges, constraints, call them what you want to, and we need to think about how we might mitigate some of these. Luckin last year, she's a Brookings Institute fellow, came out with these three kind of global, the fact that we might overestimate what AI can actually do, a bit like Google. This what she calls cognitive atrophy. So we use it a lot, and all of a sudden we just stop thinking. And then I love this one, this illusion of effortless wisdom. I'm sure that you've experienced if you've taught any students and they say, hey, can you just give me your PowerPoint? Thinking that once they have that PowerPoint on their hard drive or in their Google space, then they know it. And it's just this fallacy that we have had. So this is, again, nothing super new, but it is ongoing, more accelerated, a little bit more global if we're going to start to use this AI of these three big issues. So what do we do, right? We can empower education to, kind of develop more of this and really involve more educators. We can foster this flexibility and allow us to do more of the things and get out of this linear, like what we need to do, but really use AI in a productive way that we may see fit for our institution, our programs, whatever that might be. Position AI as a teammate, so as a co-instructor or a co-teacher, instead of kind of fighting, is it them or is it AI or is it not AI? Invest in advanced models. You're seeing these in business and in finance and education, maybe not as much yet, but hopefully we will. And ultimately to kind of think about the governance, intellectual property is going to be big. What does that mean? And I do have a few others that I've kind of found out there that we all kind of concerned about the ethics and the bias on this. And obviously we're going to see some of this. And so thinking about how we might use some diverse data sets, definitely keep faculty involved, especially with the generated assessments. I hope that that's one message that comes through. I'm definitely not one that says, "Oh, just let it go and whatever comes out comes out." But faculty need to really be on fully on board, leading and in the middle and at the end of all this. New Zealand just came out with a public service artificial intelligence framework. You're probably aware of this. Again, I'll have this linked if not, and they discuss a lot about more of these challenges and mitigation. Another one is obviously making sure that everyone has access to this. Right now, there's a fairly cheap monthly rate. I'm hoping that institutions take this as they do their LMSs and they purchase an enterprise version and make sure that everyone has access to it who wants to have access to these kind of AI modules, these AI platforms. Even though it's technology, enhance the human interaction. So, how are we going to be doing this? Trying to use it as a support rather than a replacement. Kind of hand in hand. Anyone who's played with this, and I do recommend, regardless of your viewpoint, go out and play with these platforms. I think you're going to be surprised. And I don't mean surprised in a positive way. I think you're just going to be surprised. Every time I use it, every time I work with faculty, sometimes it's, oh, well, there's 5 negatives and 1 positive, right? It's just that's where it is right now. And think about how we might be able to use this in the most appropriate way. I tend to want to focus on how is this going to basically really help out pedagogy. I think that there could be some issues of trying to just let courses be created. We've already done that a bit with the pandemic and creating online courses and asynchronous courses that we just turn on that are these cans. Hopefully we're trying to get away with some of these, but also do allow, AI can allow for some of this multimodal instruction of hybrid, high flex, blended, and involving. So we need to involve educators in all of these. We know the research is pretty clear on what works and what doesn't work, how the brain works, how we can engage students. Using these things to continue that might be a really positive thing. And the last thing I just want to share, and again, this is shots in the dark, but these are some next steps that I think that might be out there for specifically Gen AI for teaching and learning in higher education. So I think we've had centers for teaching, we've had ed tech. I think you might see more of these teaching and learning centers and ed tech combine and let the pedagogy drive this, and really kind of think about the scholarship of teaching and learning. So researching everything we do to see how it works. Along with that, number 2, create these open programs, open educational resources, and allow faculty to do a lot of this collection of data and seeing how it works, maybe with some blanket institutional review boards so they can get it done fairly quickly, and really share, a lot of sharing going on. Redesign our assessments so that we're not just doing maybe tests or even some project-based, but the project-based has some partnerships with AI, again, teamed up with making sure that we know what students are doing, making sure that they're doing the kind of things we want them to do, and we're measuring those things with these inter-rater reliable rubrics that, again, can be created from the AI. Industry is doing this. We want to get our students in internships and co-ops and get them kind of working with AI with industries. Ethical use, obviously, we can think about banning and policing, or we can think about it as a support. Evaluating these tools. We have LMSs now, which are kind of old. People who are still using these, they're more administrative than they are pedagogically. So think about how maybe AIs can do some of that work. And then obviously thinking about, instead of exams, these authentic alternative assessments that might leverage some of that AI portfolio for artifacts. So I believe that's it. My name and email. If I can do anything else, please let me know. I'm happy to help out. Don't hesitate to reach out and let me know if I can do anything further for you. So thank you very much for your time, and I wish you all the best.